So, hi, hello, welcome. I'm really excited to be the first person up here. Not a morning person, but this is about to be fun. Pete did describe my research quite well, messy and uncertain. So that's what I'm going to go with. And in the spirit of collaboration, the forms that she was just holding up, it would be really nice. I might run right at 15 minutes and so not have time for talking. So if you do have anything you want to jot down, and I'll have my email address up here later on, any kind of comments are very, very, very welcome. So I think I know a lot of you, but my name's Lowery. I'm a third-year icon student in the Department of Geography, and basically what I study are agricultural politics, and specifically focused around science and technology policy. So I came to UGA for my master's in international affairs, international policy. And I wrote my thesis on the controversy surrounding genetically modified food aid that went to, or wasn't allowed to go into Zambia in 2002. And so now I'm kind of sticking with that theme, but I'm more interested in countries that are banning genetically modified crops and genetically modified organisms as part of their environmental policy. And so my dissertation work is on the Kenyan ban of GMOs. So in 2012, Kenya, the president of Kenya, called for the complete ban on the import and consumption of GMOs in the country until they could figure out kind of what's going on safety-wise. And I did a little bit of pre-dissertation research this past summer in Nairobi, and this is kind of what I'm going to be talking about today. So basically what I want to do is just lay out a research problem pretty simply, and then briefly discuss how I'm thinking about going forward with it, and then solicit your feedback, so either via email or on some of those sheets. So the research problem. Who in here thinks that poverty is a problem? Raise your hand if you think that that's something that we should care about. Okay. You're wrong. Bill Gates has recently told us that in 20 years there will be almost no poor countries left in the world. This was a couple of weeks ago in his 2014 annual letter. Now, given this is qualified, right? Like, so he said poor by the definition that the World Bank gives us for low-income countries, and he did say, obviously, that means there's still going to be poor people in the world as well. So, but this is a super bold and super optimistic claim to make, right? That in 20 years, this is a problem that's going to be completely gone or close to gone, and really only one that the richest man in the world could make. I mean, so it's a little, and he kind of leaves aside thinking, or this one comment kind of leaves aside thinking about how he made his money, right, through this creative capitalism that he talks about. And the idea for environmental politics, the idea that there will be no poor countries means what? It means growth, right? It means growth for these lower income countries, and it really makes us think about what the environmental politics would be surrounding this. If there aren't going to be poor people, what are we going to be looking at? So I think that this comment needs to be critically evaluated. And why am I picking on Bill Gates? Well, I'm picking on Bill, somebody needs to. And then there are two main reasons. One is that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation spends a lot of money in Africa. They have at least, the grants that I counted were over $2 billion just in the last, I think, 4 years for agricultural development specifically. They also have health programs and all this other money that they spend. So it means that their voice is really loud and really has a huge effect shaping kind of the development policies and politics that are going on the continent. And they also fund the specific project that I'm looking at, which is water efficient maize for Africa. So it makes it relevant for me as well. Also, the second thing is that he claims, so he's making the claim that new vaccines, better seeds, and the digital revolution are how this is going to happen, how poverty is going to be essentially wiped out. And so essentially innovation and technology transfer. And these are not new ideas. I mean, the modernization narrative is a pretty standard since post-World War II, right? At least in the development community. And when he said, so what I'm focusing on is the better seeds and the digital revolution part. Better seeds doesn't just mean genetic modification, barely means anything anyway, but in terms of all kinds of different breeding, conventional breeding, using rDNA technology, all this kind of stuff. But digital revolution, what he means by that is more information for farmers. So being able to deal with market access, prices, these other kind of things. So these go together. And this brings me to kind of my overarching question that I think I'm always going to be asking no matter what I do, which is what is the relationship between technology and society? Like, what are we looking at? And I would say that technology is and always has been contested, right? Even in states, even in the United States, or states that are considered to have advanced technological capability, they're called to democratize technological use. And what causes the contestation is not usually like GM technology isn't bad, but the uneven access to, the uneven production of, the uneven use of is what seems to make some people uncomfortable. And this matters because technology is, and always has been, an integral part of who we are and how we work and how we govern ourselves. And it's really crucial to think about how technology should and can function in society. I mean, the main argument for technology is to improve human life at some level, right? And allow for these things that we want. And so why am I talking about agricultural biotechnology? Why am I talking about GMOs? Because the claims are pretty large. I mean, ending poverty, ending hunger, feeding the world. I mean, these are really big claims, and the kind of progressive potential of this thing needs to be evaluated. And then also because I like looking at GMOs because I do kind of think of them as a boundary object. I mean, something that I don't think many people would describe as either purely social or purely natural, and it calls forth a lot of different ideas from different groups that I think makes it kind of easier to talk about, although it is a super contested technology. And there's a whole literature on this. I mean, the STS literature deals with some of these themes. Science and democracy, for example, moving on from traditional ways of thinking about governance, like doing governance better, to kind of opening up notions of expertise or engaging civil society. And then the co-production of technology in society. So not just thinking, what is technology's role, but how it all kind of comes together. And like I said earlier, thinking about the purpose of technology, we kind of equate it with development, the politics of making things better, right? So, and then, like I was saying with boundary objects, the non-human, I like to think of it as more than human, so not in opposition to, but a lot of this literature is kind of what I'm engaging in. And what I'm kind of offering is one of the critiques of the STS literature is that the analytical tools like actor network theory can flatten out power relations sometimes when you're trying to take everything into consideration. How do you think about what the relative force is behind these different actors? And so I've been reading a lot of Gramsci, and when Antonio Gramsci is kind of a Marxist political thinker in Italy. He talks about, when I read Gramsci, I really do see the STS literature. He's talking about the STS literature, this Goldman and Turner chapter that you guys might be familiar with. They're talking about the production, the application, and the circulation of environmental knowledge. And I really do feel like this is kind of what Gramsci's talking about as well. Hegemony is the concept that's most often associated with him, and I'm definitely not going to talk about this anymore. I mean, it would be impossible. But the easiest way for me to understand the concept of that is basically thinking about understanding the conditions that make it possible for things to appear natural, for reality to kind of be shaped the way that it is. And I find that thinking about this in concert with the STS literature basically allows the kind of like the political to stay front and center, and us be able to keep these political and social and economic forces up front. And so there's obviously a lot of literature and a lot of studies already being done on the politics of GM crops in lots of different disciplines and more than these, right? A lot of ecology is kind of a broad term for it, but thinking about the risks associated with environmental health or interaction effects with different species. There's agricultural economists who study basically yield and access to markets, these kind of things. Political scientists who study states and trade agreements dealing with GM crops. And kind of more in geography, there's a lot of agrarian political economy that are studying political economists that are studying grassroots social movements and how to think about sort of resistance and the contestation. And these studies all matter to my research, and these studies are all part of what I'm looking at, but I'm asking basically a different question. And the question is basically, is there such a thing as top-down political action that is progressive? Because I'm looking at bans that are instituted by governments, by presidents of governments and through states. And so it's not quite the same thing as asking how grassroots social movements work or any of the other things that I just listed. And essentially my hypothesis is no. I don't know that that's the case. And this is not to say that I don't want that to be the case. I mean, I think it would be really great, right? But thinking about Bill Gates and thinking about, being a little critical of state-based environmental policy, we're talking about governing human and plant life. We're talking about governing genetic material. And so instead of looking at the ban, most people would think about you ban genetically modified crops because you're against them, right? And that's actually the opposite of what I'm saying, is that banning GM crops is not necessarily saying we don't want GM crops, but in the Kenyan case, it's actually providing time for the government to kind of get its act together so that it can then be repealed. It's actually assisting the integration of genetically modified crops into the country. So the thing that I find really puzzling is kind of this map that in Africa, for example, I don't know if you can you read this? I can barely read it. So the orange countries are where there are biosafety laws. The green countries are where there are already biosafety laws in place, meaning these countries are signatories to the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety and have started implementing legislation to govern genetically modified organisms. Kenya, you'll notice, is a country with a biosafety law and a country that's doing confined field trials as well. The orange countries are not doing confined field trials yet. But so if Kenya has a law in place that's supposed to regulate human and environmental health, why would they need to ban them? I mean, it's a little puzzling. And Kenya itself, it's become, GMOs are contentious across the world, but it's, the Daily Nation is one of the two largest newspapers in Kenya, and this is the three that I'm about to show you are just from 1 week in May. People get really upset. It's why is there a ban? It doesn't even make sense. It's not even legal. The ban is political. Questioning the science that goes behind the ban that was used to get the president to do it. So it's a really contentious topic. And the way that I want to investigate it is threefold. So looking at the groups that fund both pro and anti-GM projects. So this was part of the research that I did in Nairobi, but it definitely is not finished. So why they do, what their strategies are for development and distribution. And then and hopefully I'll be able to do my research this fall, and there are two kind of main components to what I would like to look at. One is actually participant observation of the development of water-efficient maize for Africa. So in theory, I go and I hang out with these scientists and learn actually the day-to-day process of making and commercializing this crop, the structural kind of limits and influences that scientists are having to work within and around, and the narratives that are shaping crop development. So basically learning how to produce a genetically modified crop. And then the second part is interviews with the policymakers and scientists that are actually going to be taking all of this knowledge that's being produced and integrating it into policy. And then actually continuing the first part as well, the investigation of, why does the Gates Foundation think this? So WEMA is funded not only by the Gates Foundation, but by USAID and the Howard Buffett Foundation. And what I think I might find, this is all hypothesis, and I have no idea if any of this is true at all, but looking at how it functions, so I was talking earlier, the kind of obvious idea is that it's a challenge to agribusiness. But what I'm trying to look at it as a tool of hegemony, so basically something that's allowing the government of Kenya to get better infrastructure, better trained scientists, better regulatory system in general, so that they'll be able to commercialize these crops and get it going and not be criticized like a lot of African countries are for having poor, not enough capacity and poor governance. And then getting ready to actually commercialize it. So I'm going to end right there. Look at that, it was right on time. I have 1 minute left. It's probably not enough to actually have any questions. I'm absolutely happy if you've got questions to take them, but there's my email address, and please do feel free to fill out the other thing as well.